It's been a while, but it's good to be back. Welcome to Decades. Today's topic is the Big Bang and the nature of reality, the context for the universe's cosmic history. We're going to run down what we know from sources like the Smithsonian and NASA. We'll talk about particles, energy, and such, and review everything at the end. By the way, if you don't like the fast or slow pace of the video, feel free to pause it at any time or simply put it at a different speed. So now, let's begin. So to begin, I'll say that my Big Bang outer space history information comes from the 2017 edition of Stephen Hawking's book, A Brief History of Time, as well as the book Universe, the Definitive Visual Guide by the Smithsonian, and a bunch of other information comes from the website Britannica, which is basically Wikipedia, a place with a lot of information, knowledge. It's fancy, but you have to pay for it. I also use Western government research websites like nasa.gov to help clarify certain details as well, and sites like Smithsonian and National Geographic for the same clarity. And I make sure that this info is correct in my books and Britannica as well. Anyway, that's where I get my information. It should be in the description. And it starts with a singularity, a point in space and time that was infinitely small, infinitely dense, with unlimited power and heat, and overall chaotic, meaning its laws of physics were beyond and more powerful than you or I could possibly imagine. A superparticle of pure light, pure energy, the same thing. Where stuff that is largely impossible now was very, very common 13.8 billion years ago, when our current reality started in what's now called the Big Bang. But if you want to be Greek about it, it might be called I Genesi tu Anu, the sky's birth, its genesis in biblical terms. Anyway, about those 13.8 billion years, that's a ridiculously big number. It's even hard to understand for trained scientists. So let's explain it in easier to comprehend terms. 5 years is often perceived as a very long time. I, for instance, used to be a devout Christian 5 years ago. After a lot of disillusionment with it, I've entered a more secular part of my life. I used to have a lot of optimism that my life could drastically and realistically improve if I just persevered long enough. A lot of people, notably young people, can change in significant ways in just 5 years. We can often become very different people. Elementary, primary school you would be different from middle school you, who would then be different from high school, college, 20s, 30s, etc. you. A lot can change in a somewhat short or long period of time. And side note, a lot of your body cells are replaced on a regular basis. Fat and bones are replaced every 10-ish years. Your red blood cells are replaced every 4 months. Stomach and white blood cells are often replaced every few days. But your brain and the surface of your eyes and teeth are pretty much with you your whole life. So in many ways, much of your body is replaced every 10 years. But this varies drastically depending on the cell. So 5 years and 10 years are a long time. And a whole lifetime in the US of about 80 years means that many seniors in the 2020s were born often during World War II or just in the 1940s. This is when the Cold War was started. Earlier, the Germans and Japanese were trying to dominate the world. Furthermore, much of the world was covered in oppressive European colonies. The world population was 2.5 billion, or less, as opposed to 8 billion-ish that we have now. The world was very different 80 years before now. Double those 80 years, and we're in the 1860s. The US Civil War was ongoing. Europe and places like Brazil, India, and China were dominated by kings and rulers who inherited their lands. Queen Victoria was ruler of the vast and powerful British Empire. China and Japan were undergoing humiliation and transformation with their emperors' governments and such. 1,000 years ago, we were in medieval times where Vikings were around. Everyone was dying of disease like smallpox, and the Byzantine Romans were still a strong empire, like other entities across the world, with, in general, very centralized governments and very powerful kings, who no one questioned because if you didn't obey, you wouldn't go to heaven, nirvana, or whatever. Also, with great slavery comes great physical abuse from the masters. Another 1,000 years, and it's when Jesus Christ was alive. The Romans, Persians, Chinese, Mayans, among others, dominated their corners of the world, and barbarian factions controlled very small territories, but collectively dominated many arid and jungle places, generally in the middle of nowhere. Around 10,000 BC, humans were just beginning to adopt agriculture, grains, and grass harvesting on a more advanced scale. And no animals other than dogs were domesticated at this point. But a lot of this stuff is still being debated and analyzed by smart people. New archaeological finds are being made every month, every year, all that good stuff. 100,000 years ago, much, if not most, of the human population is still in Dunya Meriti, East Africa. 1 million years and Homo erectus was still the dominant ape of the world, and ice sheets covered Chile and Tibet. 10 million, and like 40% of mammals we know today didn't exist yet. Only their weird-looking predecessors and many still weird and horrifying animals yet lived on the Earth. 100 million, and Earth looked like this. The continents were much closer together, water was everywhere, and jungles were at the poles, and dinosaurs still reigned supreme. 1 billion, and Earth looked like this, and all individual life forms were just microscopic. 4.5-ish billion years ago, and the sun, the planets, all our solar system was in a very nascent stage of development. It was a lot of gas and dust. The ashes of likely several stars that exploded in violent supernovas. The sun was compressing, but technically wasn't yet a star. And this was after the Milky Way itself gained much of its current mass by 10 billion years ago, which is when infinite other galaxies, or at least roughly 10 billion-ish galaxies, were also spinning, evolving, and changing in multiple ways, with new planets and new events happening in the widest scale of the vast infinite universe. 13.8 billion years ago, and the universe was at a singular point. A zero-dimensional space, a singularity. So this brief history of everything gives you a giant scale of how old the universe is. 1,000 years is indeed a long time for us humans, but it's nothing compared to the true age of the world around us. Anyway, Hawking says that in the very beginning, in these extreme conditions, space-time itself warps severely in on itself. And yes, for our purposes, space-time is one entity, not two. There are 3 spatial dimensions, and 1 time dimension. At least so Stephen Hawking says. 3-dimensional beings can go through width, length, and height, but can only move forward in time. Only moving forward. They can't stay put or go back in time. They can only go forwards. These are 3-dimensional beings. So in this singularity, the normal laws of physics don't apply here. Gravity and the nuclear forces of atoms, and then electromagnetism. All of them didn't exist yet. So the singularity couldn't collapse in on itself, and it was infinitely hot, because of the infinite or just vast amounts of energy in said superpoint. Thus, in physics, whenever there is a singularity, the laws of physics will fundamentally change, by definition of Einstein's general relativity all the way back in the 1910s. And perhaps these particles were strings or made of them. Very, very tiny particles that have one-dimensional length, and this string theory also posits that there are 10 space-time dimensions. It's just that the higher dimensions are nano-thin, and hence avoid detection.